Awesome. Oh gosh. And thank you guys so much for coming. It's such a like truly such a privilege to be able to do. And man, there's kind of nothing like the big book. It's so cool. And as we go through this big book study today, and as we go through, which I've learned takes me about a year. So this year, feel free to come. If you're like, I'm a bail. I mean, it's consensual. This big book study is consensual. Nobody's going to make you. But as we go through this book and we go on this journey, my hope is that we can have a new experience. We can see things in a new way. But also as we go through, we not only glean the clear-cut, precise directions on how we can recover, but also we get a better idea of how we can help others. And that's always sort of my intention. So let's kick it off. And let's kick it off from the very beginning. So what we're going to do is we're going to open it up to the title page. I have to hold my book together because it's falling apart. Funny how it's falling apart, but my life doesn't seem to be. There's perhaps a correlation there. Let's open up to the title page. And what's incredible about the title page is it gives us the name of this book, and I'm going to emphasize and re-emphasize this. The book is Alcoholics Anonymous. We'll call it the big book. We'll refer to it as the big book. But in a couple weeks, we're going to, I'm going to spoil it. You guys here for spoilers? Or do you want to be in suspense? Oh, I've got consent for spoilers. And who knows, we might forget, But Alcoholics Anonymous, the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, was named after the book. And so that is why I'm going to emphasize and re-emphasize that this book is called Alcoholics Anonymous. The whole fellowship is named after this book. So here's what it says. It says this story of how many thousands of men and women, and an interesting thing when, we talk about men and women, and we often refer to the first 100 members. I want you to know with the first 100 members, it was more like 80, and it was about 79 dudes and 1 woman. So whenever we see men and women, what I want you to know is at the time, it was actually an incredibly hopeful and inclusive statement. And it says how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. And I want to point some things out. The first I want to point out is how. The directions for how we get well are right here in this book. And that's why we're going to go line by line, page by page, and because it's me, and I'll be honest with you guys, tangent by tangent through this book. A little all over the place at times. And then it says have recovered from alcoholism. And if you're new, or if you're struggling, or you're a chronic relapse, or with whatever brings you to this study, and you're in and out and in and out, what I want you to know is recovered is what we're after. Recovered is what I need. But you might be somebody that hears that word recovered and be like, oh, I don't like that word. I know that my illness is never cured. And what I want to emphasize and take us on a very early tangent, we haven't even talked about the symbol. We're like not even a sentence in. But let's talk about what it means to be recovered. Recovered does not mean cured, but let's take a glimpse at what it means to be recovered. Let's pop over. By the way, this is how this thing often goes. I'm like, let's go to this page. Let's go to that page. Woo! Let's pop over to the bottom of page 84. It's right below the line, love and tolerance of others is our code. Oh man, we got a code, love and tolerance, even when it's hard, even if we're on the highway, man. All right. Even if somebody's got too many groceries in the like 10 items or less aisle, oh, love and tolerance. All right. So bottom paragraph of page 84, and these are what is known as the step 10 promises. And this is a beautiful description of what it means to be recovered. It says, and we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol, even whatever brings you to this all-inclusive study. For by this time, sanity will have returned. What does it mean for sanity to have returned? See, I don't know about you, but something happens to me. And what happens to me is I say, I am never going to drink or use again. And I want you to know I mean it. I mean it with everything that is in me. I come to the morning after, or afternoon if it was real rough, filled with guilt and shame and remorse and self-hatred and self-pity. And I say, that's it. I never want to do it again. And a day, a week, a month, several months down the line, I've done it again. And so when we talk about restored to sanity, what we're talking about is a thought that I have in my mind that tells me this time will be different. Nobody will ever know. I'll go out for 3 drinks. My problem was alcohol, but I can smoke crack like a lady. Some of you guys are aware I've never done anything like a lady. But that thought is gone. That's what we're talking about. And this is what it means to be recovered. It says we will seldom, which is rarely, be interested in liquor if tempted. So if the thought comes, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. See, before, when I'm at step 1, before I come to the rooms at 12 step, I can't stop myself from touching that hot stove. I touch it again and again and again. I know it's hurting me. I know it's ruining my life. I know it's burned everything to the ground, and yet I touch it again. But here at step 10, and actively practicing the 10th step, I can see that it's hot. I know that it's hot, and I don't want to touch it. The problem, we're going to read, the problem has been removed. It says we recoil from it as from a hot flame. And welcome to those that just joined. Yeah, we are at the very start of the book and also on page 84 at the same time. Rock and roll. So we recoil from it as from a hot flame. I know it's hot. I don't need to touch it. It says we react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. We will see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That is the miracle of it. We're not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. You see, what happens is I take a series of action. I take a course of action that I do not think will help, that I think is the stupidest thing my sponsor could have ever suggested, and I think is a really good idea for you guys, but could not possibly apply to me. And I take actions that I'm terrified of. And the result of that is a change happens to me. A change happens to me. I don't have to fight. I don't have to try to avoid that first drink. I don't have to watch out for slippery places. The change happens to me. It just comes. That is the miracle of it. We are not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. Now, if you're new here today, and if you haven't taken that leap of faith, you haven't dived into these steps, and we see that 3rd step, and that 3rd step has made a decision. It's simply a decision to work these 12 steps as a way of life, like my life depends on it, because it does. But I see that care. In the 3rd step, I do not know if my will and my life will be cared for as I work these steps. But any time in this book, I see a promise. But deeper than that, any time in my life, I experience a promise as it is outlined in this book that becomes irrefutable evidence of God, higher power, creator, spirit of the universe's care for somebody like me and my silly little will and my silly little life. Position in neutrality, safe and protected. We have not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We are neither cocky nor are we afraid. That is our experience. This isn't an idea that, hey, that'd be a good idea if that happened to those little drunks, those little drug addicts, those little compulsive overeaters, compulsive gamblers. No, that is our experience. Those of us who have done this work, that is our experience. Now, here is what, if you are somebody that hears the word recovered and makes you uncomfortable, it says that is how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. See, I am not cured of this illness. There will never be a time in my life where I can ever safely drink or use anything ever again. But there will also never be a time in my life when I cannot be fully engaged in these 12 steps as a way of life. Because if I stop doing this, the grace leaves, the obsession comes, and that first drink, that first drug looks like a good idea, and I believe the lie. And so when we talk about recovered, that's what we're talking about. So going back to the title page, recovered. That girl, this is the first promise in the book. Like, exciting, a promise. And so again, if you're somebody who's relapsing in and out and in and out and in and out, what I want you to know is this promise is real. And if you're somebody who is holding on by just the skin of your teeth, you know, your knuckles are white and you don't know if you can make it another day, that is a promise. And it is a promise that is promised to each and every one of us recovered. And that is our experience. And my hope is if you have not had that experience, man, let us help you because it is incredible. So on my book, it says that it is the 4th edition. Now, I have a sponsee and he lives in the UK. I have a bunch of sponsees in the UK, but I have one sponsee in the UK who I met in Illinois. It's a bit of a long story, road trip into Akron, rock and roll. But he brought me a UK version of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. I know, I was such a nerd. You have no idea how excited I was about this. So excited. And I just want to show you the cover page for the UK version. And on the cover page, it's got the AA symbol. Now I'm a screen share. I'm gonna put some stuff on the screen, but it's got the AA symbol. And some of you guys in North America are like, what? Where's my symbol? Where'd it go? How come I don't have one? And the reason is in North American copyright law, you have to protect a copyright. And to protect a copyright, what that means is that you have to sue people if they use that symbol. And that didn't seem in line with sort of primary purpose. You know what I'm saying? So we let that copyright go. And I like to tell the joke, hey, we're great at sobering up drunks, not so great at copyright law, but that's actually the truth. But the symbol, the Alcoholics Anonymous symbol, is actually just something that can be really helpful. So I'm gonna bring it up, and if you haven't ever seen it before, I wanted to make it big so everyone could see it. And what we see is we see this circle, and that is a circle of unity, but it is also a circle of wholeness. And at the base of the triangle, what we have is recovery. And what is recovery? Like, what does that mean? Recovery is the 12 steps as taken out of the book Alcoholics Anonymous. That is recovery. Recovery is the prayer, the inventory, the amends, the meditation. It is the, being of service to others, the 12-step work that we do. That is recovery. And that is the base. Because the truth of the matter is, for a silly little drunk and a silly little addict like me, if I don't have all 12 steps as a foundation, that triangle is falling apart. I don't have anything else. You know what I mean? Like, if I don't have that base, I'm going to get high. I'm going to get drunk. Or somebody like me, I'm going to end my life. And that's been my experience. So the foundation is the 12 steps. But we also have unity. And a good way to look at unity is the fellowship. Going to meetings, and I like meetings are amazing. They're great. And it's also the virtual parking lot after the meeting, or the physical parking lot after the meeting where we chain smoke and talk about God, or the Denny's or the Humpties, or the Humpties is Canadian for like the Americans that are like, what did she say? Or the, whatever, the late night diner that people go to after the meeting, the connection with others in the fellowship. And I can ask myself, okay, am I fully engaged in these 12 steps as a way of life? Is my foundation in recovery solid? And if not, don't shame ourselves, but let's dive in. And I can ask myself, am I connecting with other people in the fellowship? Am I reaching out to others? Am I, going to meetings? That's that unity. And the service is, do I have a service commitment? Do I have a service commitment at my home group, maybe at district or area, or, am I a part of a subcommittee, being of service? And, years ago, for a number of years, I was engaged in a process called Steel on Steel. And it was created by a well-known speaker, but really just a man that was like inspired. And his name was Mark Houston. And what we would do is it would be a group of us, 3 or 4 of us, we would get together and we would hold each other spiritually accountable. And there's these sheets and you can find them and get them. And we'd come together and we'd talk about the difficulties we had living a spiritual way of life. And we would share about, and how the sheets always started was with, where were you with the circle and the triangle? So what did your 12-step work look like? Were you just praying and meditating? Were you praying the 9-step prayers? Have you made your amends? Like those sorts of things. And then the unity, am I What does my meeting attendance look like? Am I connecting with other people? Service, do I have a commitment? And then it gets into all other areas of our life. And what I found time and time and time again is if I was proportionally involved in all three sides of that triangle, there weren't a lot of issues down the page with work and family and like relationships and all these other things. But when this was off, everything else was off. And so this is just a beautiful way to kind of look at this whole thing. And where we're going to really, really focus as we go through this big book studies on recovery, the 12 steps, the directions is taken out of this book. Because if I don't have that, I'm in trouble. So that's the title page. And some of you guys are like, 21 minutes? 21 minutes for a title page. Rock and roll. All right. And so what we can do is we can skip over the contents and we'll pop over to page XI and we'll dive right into the preface. I had a sponsee one time who insisted it was called Preface. And I'm like, I'm pretty flexible, but I'm just kidding. If you want to call it Preface, you call it Preface. We will preface or preface, rock and roll. So this is the preface. And it says, this is the 4th edition of the book, Alcoholics Anonymous. So again, the title of this book is Alcoholics Anonymous. And the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous is named after the title of this book. So the first edition appeared in April 1939, and in the following 16 years, more than 300,000 copies went into circulation. Now, what I would like you to do is if you're writing in your book, which why wouldn't you? It's a whole lot of fun. And especially if you guys came from a generation where you weren't allowed to write in books, oh, let's do it. Let's be rebels, like, yeah, let's write in that book. I'm going to highlight it and everything. And I'm going to use pen. You can use pencil if you want to, but I'm going to use pen, like, yeah, maybe Sharpie's a little too intense, just as a no pressure suggestion. You do you though. But make a little note about that 300,000 copies. As we get into the forward to the 2nd edition, we're going to do some math. Don't leave. Stick with me. I promise I will do the math. I will not make anyone do math. I'll do the math, but what we will do is we will come back to this number. So in the following 16 years, more than 300,000 copies went into circulation. The 2nd edition, published in 1955, reached a total of more than 1,150,500 copies. The 3rd edition, which came off the press in 1976, achieved a circulation of approximately 19.5-ish million in all formats. And I want you to know that I have worked with sponsees line by line, like I couldn't even count how many people. I have facilitated big book studies for years, and I still haven't learned that precise number. I just always say 19.5-ish million. Spiritual progress. We're rocking and rolling. All right. And it says, because this book has become the basic text for our society. And I want to stop there. I want to point out what we're talking about is a textbook. But what I don't want you guys to do is, again, have flashbacks to school, like, oh, she's going to make me do math and it's a textbook. Hold on. Because listen, many of us did not enjoy that educational pursuit. But listen, I've turned into quite a nerd. Surprise to me too. But what we're talking about is that this is a textbook. Now, a textbook is a book that we are to learn from, to study. It's not, but I will say, it's not one of those scandalous like paperback romance novels that you want to take on vacation. Although I absolutely would read the big book on the beach. That sounds delightful. I'm one of those. And listen, there is some like hot gossip in the history. So stick around for the history, exciting and riveting. But it is a textbook, which means I'm meant to learn and study it, that I'm not ever done, that I'm trying to grow in this process. And if a textbook kind of hits you in a weird place, you're like, I don't know about that. What if we took it like a science book? What if we took it like a chemistry book? So in a chemistry book, it's going to give me some information, and this book is going to give us some information about the nature of the illness of alcoholism, or the nature of the illness of addiction, the nature of the illness that is described in this book, so some information. And then it's going to give us some directions. And what we can do is we can follow those directions just like we would a chemistry experiment and see what happens. See what happens. And the coolest thing about this book, Alcoholics Anonymous, is it doesn't ask that I believe in anything. It asks that I believe that this experiment is possible. Do you know what I'm saying? All I'm being asked to do is run the experiment. And just a fun thing, if you're here today and you're already annoyed by this process, fair enough. Fair enough. I wasn't jazzercised to be here. I am now very jazzercised. But what I want you to know is that you can run this experiment with bad motives. You can run this experiment trying to prove it wrong. You can run this experiment just trying to get people off your back. But here's the thing, if I run this experiment with everything that I have, and I really do this, a change will happen, almost always despite myself. And so it's about whether or not I run the experiment. Now, let's go back to chemistry. There are some times we've been in chemistry class, actually probably not me. They probably didn't let me work with anything unsafe or dangerous. They're probably, keep that away from her. But if you're working with chemicals that could be dangerous, you want to follow the directions precisely. And again, that is why we're going line by line, because we want to get a glimpse of the clear-cut directions so that we don't have an explosion. Because an explosion is drinking again, right? An explosion is burning my life to the ground. So I don't want to do that. And I will point out, even though there are clear-cut directions, I might see inventory or meditation in a way, or glean some directions in a way that maybe your sponsor doesn't. And I want you to know that that is okay. What I've learned in this whole Zoom era is that there are clear-cut directions, and there's a little bit of wiggle room. There's some interpretation. So if I am sharing anything with you that is a little bit different, what I want you to know is I am wrong. I am wrong, and you're right. I'm wrong. But I always like to say, come join me. It's fun over here being wrong. We have a good time. So just let's have an experience. So because this book has become the basic text to learn, to study, to grow, to have an experiment with for our society, and has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery. So what it's saying, because this is our basic text and because it works, people are following its directions and getting well. There exists strong sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. So what we're saying is we're a little ooh, about change, especially to this book. I will say, we as a people, and it's a human thing, we don't like change. I mean, this is a joke. What's the two things an alcoholic can't stand? It's things exactly are in this moment and change. We back ourselves into some no-win predicaments, right? So, but the reason that we're not super open to changing this book is because it works. It works, and it's worked for so long. So it goes on to say, therefore, the first portion of this volume describing the AA recovery program has been left largely untouched in the course of revisions made in the course of revisions made for the second, third, and fourth edition. So what it's saying is the directions. Now we call it the first 164 pages. That includes the prefaces, the forewords, and the doctor's opinion. But what it's saying is what we kind of know as the first 164. And from the first edition onward has by and large not changed. The directions on how to get well have not changed because it works. That's why. Listen, we love tinkering. We also, I was like, we don't like change, but we also, we like tinkering with things, don't we? We hate change, but also let me put my little spin on it. You know what I mean? If it didn't work, it'd be different. You know what I'm saying? So it works. Again, no-win situations, we back ourselves right in on those. So it goes on to say, therefore, the first portion of this volume describing the AA recovery program has been left largely untouched in the course of revisions made for the second, third, and fourth editions. The section called the doctor's opinion has been kept intact just as it was originally written in 1939 by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, our society's great medical benefactor. And we're going to talk about him I'm going to say he's my homie. He's my homie. He doesn't have to be your homie. I love him. Silky, what up, my guy? And why he's important and why we care about his opinion is he gave us knowledge of what our problem is. He gave us knowledge of what it means to be an alcoholic, what it means to be an addict or a compulsive, whatever brings you to this study. And because we're already going on tangents all over the place, real quick, if you're wondering, what does it mean? I have a physical allergy. So once I start, I cannot control the amount that I take every single time. And I have an obsession of the mind. And what that means is when I say I do not want to do it again, a day, a week, a month later, I get a thought that happens in my mind that tells me, yeah, you can do it again. And that is our illness. So, and we can thank Silky for that. Silky, my guy, and we'll read a lot more about him. Or my homie, doesn't have to be your homie, but I feel like our homie, So what we're now going to get into is what has changed. So the second edition added the appendices. That's the stuff in the back of the book, the 12 traditions, because we didn't have them when this book was first published in 1939. They weren't accepted until 1950, formally. And the directions for getting in touch with AA. So as the fellowship grew, we added the traditions and we had some things that we added in the appendices. But the chief change, the major change, was in the section of personal stories, which was expanded to reflect the fellowship's growth. And so what we're going to read, and I'm going to do it really quickly, we're gonna pick up with some velocity on the reading. So if you're like, I'm not following, that's okay. But what we are going to read is that the stories have changed. And the stories have changed to reflect the growth of the fellowship. Now, in the first edition, it was a bunch of middle-aged white dudes named Bill and Bob and William and Robert and maybe a Richard or two. That's my dick joke. Richard? I don't look like a middle-aged, well, maybe, I don't know. It doesn't matter what I look like, but that, like when I got here, I was in my early 20s, I couldn't relate to these. By the way, they're probably as old as I am now, like, oh, so old, the folly of youth. But the stories have changed as this message reached other alcoholics so that we could see that women can get well. People with variety of backgrounds and cultures and countries and languages and experiences can recover. And the stories have changed. And we'll talk about it a little bit more, but the reason the stories have changed is this book was meant to go out into the world and carry this message. I might be an alcoholic alone in the world and definitely not have the privilege of Zoom, but also not have the privilege of an AA meeting, a central office, or you know what I mean? Like I might be alone with this book and I might need to have that experience of reading my story. Like when you come to the meetings and you hear people share and they share, and how did they know? That's my experience. And so that's why the stories are there. So it says Bill's story, Dr. Bob's nightmare, and one other personal history from the first edition were retained intact. 3 were edited, and one of these was retitled. New versions of 2 stories were written with new titles. 30 completely new stories were added, and the story section was divided into 3 parts under the same headings that are used now. In the 3rd edition, part 1, Pioneers of AA, was left unchanged. 9 of the stories in part 2, They Stopped in Time, were carried over from the 2nd edition. 8 new stories were added. In part 3, They Lost Nearly All. 8 stories were retained and 5 new ones were added. Now, I normally don't stop here, but I'm going to stop here and point some. I know it's like, girl, sudden stop. Whoa, you pumped the brakes on that, But what I want to point out is, so we have the pioneers. The first section of stories is pioneers. So those are those early AA members. But then the 2 other sections are They Stopped in Time and They Lost Nearly All. Those 2 sections are to address nearly everyone's resistance to the fellowship. That idea of, I'm not as bad as you. I know nobody here came and ever thought I'm not as bad as you. I don't fit and I don't belong. But those stories are to address that. I'm not as bad as you. And then what's the other thing that I have that's a denial that I'm not like you is I'm so much worse than you. You couldn't help me. They lost nearly all. Now, Listen, when I got here, I was both in the same meeting. I'd hear one person share and I'd think, whoa, I'm way worse than that guy. Next person share, whoa, I'm not as bad as you. And I was looking for all the ways I didn't fit and all the ways I didn't belong. And that's the purpose of these stories. So that I could see maybe, just maybe, I have this illness that's being described in this book, and maybe, just maybe, I can recover by the same course of action. So this 4th edition includes the 12 concepts for world service and revises the 3 sections of personal stories as follows. 1 new story has been added to part 1, and 2 that originally appeared in part 3 have been repositioned there. 6 stories have been deleted. 6 of the stories in part 2 have been carried over. 11 new ones have been added, and 11 taken out. Part 3 now includes 12 new stories. 8 were removed in addition to the 2 that were transferred to part 1. And what I want to put, I'm sorry, I was trying to do a slower stuff. I don't know if that was better. In my years of doing this, I've only had one person ever ask, like, what was one of the stories that was you know what I mean? Like, I've only ever had one person ask about this piece of information. But if you are interested in the stories that were taken out of this book, there's a book and it's called Experience, Strength, and Hope. And it's a collection of all the stories that were taken out in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd edition. And so if you're ever interested, that's where you'd find it. Experience, Strength, and Hope. So, and I want you to know, so often when I kick off a big book study, I forget to physically grab the book and it's slightly out of arm's reach. And almost every time I'm like, oh, it's over there. So I feel really, really proud of myself that I remembered to grab it and I can show it to you. Oh, it's the little things, right? So it says, all changes made over the years in the big book. AA members' fond nickname for this volume. And keep in mind, when this was first published, it was published on oh man, I have a replica 1st edition. Darn it, I was so proud of myself. And it's like literally out of arm's reach. I could have showed you. Darn it. Get a little like, oh, look at me. And then immediately brought back down to earth. But in the 1st edition, they used a thick cardstock. And so it really was like, it felt like a big book. And that's how it got its name, right? Or its nickname. So again, the book is Alcoholics Anonymous. The fellowship is named after the book, not the other way around. So it says all of the changes made over the years in the big book, AA members' fond nickname for this volume, have had the same purpose: to represent the current membership of Alcoholics Anonymous more accurately, and thereby to reach more alcoholics. So the stories have changed so that I could read the story and think, yeah, I'm like that. I get ahead of myself. It'll explain. It says, if you have a drinking problem, we hope that you may pause in reading one of the 42 personal stories and think, yes, that happened to me. Or more important, yes, I felt like that. Or most important, yes, I believe this program can work for me too. So as the fellowship began to grow and more people began to recover from this illness, we wanted to include those studies so that I could see, man, this thing could help me too. All right, let's rock and roll forward to the 1st edition. And oh, it's a gooder. I love the 1st paragraph of the foreword to the 1st edition. And it says, this is the foreword as it appeared in the 1st printing of the 1st edition in 1939. So when this book was first published and first went out to the world, this was the foreword that was there. And the reason I love the foreword to the 1st edition, the 1st paragraph, not that I'm not going to pick on the 2nd paragraph. It's good too. We'll talk about it. But it succinctly describes what we are here to do. And I know of a couple groups out in Ontario where they use the 1st paragraph of the foreword to the 1st edition as a preamble, as a way to start their meetings. So I think it's delightful. You don't have to think it's delightful, but it's funner if you do. All righty. So it says, we of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the we that it's referring to is the first 180 members of Alcoholics Anonymous. But here is something that I believe to be true. And if you disagree with me, what I want you to know is you are right. And I'm over here being wrong. But what I believe is the more of us that take the actions of this book as outlined in this book, the more of us that are included in the we, because we have had the experience that is described in this book. So And listen, you can be like, "Oh, are you wrong?" That's fair. I'm wrong. But that's what I believe. I get to be a part of the we. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women. Women, that's the one. But more than 100 men and women who have recovered. Recovered. We're going to point that word out again and again and again. And just to remind you, if you hear that word and it's not your favorite, recovered does not mean cured. Recovered does not mean I'm not an alcoholic or I'm not an addict. Recovered means that the obsession to drink, to use, to act out in that compulsive behavior is gone as the result of the course of action of the 12 steps. That's what we're talking about. Recovered. And it says, we are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless. And that's a word I'm going to point out again and again and again, hopeless. Because I don't know about you, but here's my experience. I have to come to that place of hopelessness. And to come to that place of hopelessness is honestly just to see the reality of my predicament, to see that I am hopeless. If I have this illness, I am hopeless. And we see this as a pattern throughout this book. This is the first place we see it. We go from hopeless to hope. And I need to accept my hopelessness to be able to accept the hope, to grab a hold of the hope. And so hopeless, a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And you can make a little note, that seemingly hopeless state of mind is the mental obsession. It's that thought that I have when I am as sober as I am today and my illness is untreated. That little thought that looks like this time I'll be different. Nobody will ever know. I'll go out for 3 drinks, or I'll go out for 3 days. Or it looks like, when the thoughts are on you, take a drink, take a drink, take a drink, take a drink, and I finally give in. Or it looks like a case of the suddenlies and I got a drink or a pipe or a pill in hand and I almost don't know how it happened. It looks like I'm going to kill myself anyway, so why don't I get drunk? That is a mental obsession. That is my hopeless state of mind. And when it talks about our seemingly hopeless state of body, what we're talking about is the physical allergy. That thing where I take a drink or a drug, that's just for me. Like I take anything mind altering, gives me a buzz. I'm like, more, all of it, until I've burnt my life to the ground. And I will just throw something out here. In that kind of the way, if it feels good, do it. All of it until I've ruined my life. The exception is step work. That's where we're like, no, let me take my time. Let me wait on. No, dive in. But here's what the physical allergy looks like. It looks like I could take a drink or I take a drug, and it's that thing that sets off inside of me, and it tells me more. Now, there were times where it did not set off, and I want to point that out, because if you're here today and you're trying to say, hey, I'm not like you, you're remembering that time back in 97 with the Spice Girls where it didn't set off. We were talking about the Spice Girls before the group meeting. We're talking like, oh man, I watched Ginger Spice sing and I only had 3 drinks like a lady, But we need to remember that's the exception, not the rule. And more often than not, did I take a drink and that drink set off something inside of me that told me more. And the more that I drank, the louder that more got. You see, I needed that next drink far more than I needed that first. See, I take a drink and it's like I get thirstier. You know what I'm saying? And we're off on this tangent. That if you're like, I don't know if it's an allergy page, physical allergy, what I want you to know is that does not happen to me with any other beverage. No, my stomach stopped handling coffee a couple of years ago, and I say that because I want your sympathy. Because really, that was not fun. But my stomach stopped handling coffee. So I start my day every morning with prayer, and I start my morning with meditation, and then I have a cup of Earl Grey tea. And not once in my life, not once have I gone on a 3-day Earl Grey tea bender. Just never happened. Not once in my life have I had a cup of Earl Grey tea and another and another and another. And I'm drinking all the tea in the house and I'm scrounging in the pantry and found a box of chamomile, ripped it open and snorted it because it's going to be the same. I just have a cup of tea. So that's a normal reaction. You know what I'm saying? So that is the seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, physical allergy, mental obsession. And it says to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered. So precisely to give us clear, cut, precise directions. And that is why we're going through line by line. And I will say it is, like Rob says, exactly, specifically. But there is a little bit of wiggle room and slightly different interpretations. And that's okay. And when it says, is the main purpose of this book, oh, I should give a shout out to the Davids, David G and David G on Wednesday nights. What a good title for a big book study. Huh? Main purposes? Nah, already. Just page to the announcements in the announcement section. Don't blend it. It gets too weird. Rock and roll. So the main purpose of this book is to give somebody like me precise directions on how I can recover, how I can get from that hopeless state of mind and body to that place where I am recovered. That is the point of this whole thing. And again, why we are studying it. So one of the things I will also say now, there's a I've looked into this and I wasn't able to find information. So there is a possibility that this might not be true, but I never let it get in the way of a good story. So in the 1930s, when they were printing books, they had to physically go out and change the typeface. And that cost extra money. And so like in today, you can hit Control-I and get italics, or Command-I and get italics. Now, if you did not know that, that's a wonderful takeaway from this big book study, right? You got, right? Control-B makes it bold. Control-C is a copy. Control-V is a paste. Sorry, focus. Listen, come due to the hopeless dilemma that we find ourselves in. Stay for the spiritual awakening, clear-cut directions, and also a little bit of IT help on the side. You know what I'm saying? But they didn't have the luxury of Control-I. It cost extra money. And so they did not, I'm helping, which is so funny because Rob does the chat all the time. Oh, it's going to get fancy. It's always fancy in the chat with Rob, always. But it's going to get a little fancier. We're going to see some italics. We're going to see some bold. Maybe it's going to change the sizes. Ooh, no pressure. But if there's not emojis, we're going to write a strongly worded letter. I'm kidding. You don't have to do emojis. I'm so sorry. But when they were publishing this book, they did not have money. They were scraping it together, trying to sell shares of Works Publishing. And so it's important to remember that if there is italics, that means that about 180 drunks agreed that it was a good idea to spend money on it. Now, if you don't know what a miracle that is, go to your home group and propose spending money and just see you know what I mean? Listen, I think we should get a nicer paper coffee cup, or we should get one that's like eating and then like, they're just yelling, So if it's in italics, it's important because italics is meant for emphasis. But also, it is possible that these drunks who didn't have a lot of money spent extra money on it. So for them, for people like us, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. And what it's saying is we're hoping that as you read this book, you have that experience of like, who's been watching in my windows? Who has been reading my diary? You know what I mean? How did you know? That's what they're hoping, that you have this moment of like, whoa, how did they know? And it says, we think this account of our experiences will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend, which is to say, many do not understand that the alcoholic is a very sick person. Now, when this book was published in 1939, that is a bit of a radical idea. Heck, it might even be a bit of a radical idea in 2024, even though alcoholism and addiction have been recognized as a disease by the American Medical and American Psychiatric Association. That idea that illness, sick person. But in 1939, that is some groundbreaking news. You know what I'm saying? That they are ill. We are ill. But I want you to know, if you're like me, when I first started coming around, I thought, well, I knew something was wrong, and I'm ill. But I really felt like what was wrong with me was that there was something in the core of who I was that was broken, like at depth. That I was just the worst person that ever lived. And I want you to know, if you're here today, what you have is an illness. What you have is an illness that compels you to drink against your will, or use against your will, or act out against your will. You see, the part of why I thought I was a bad person is I would make those promises. You know, those promises we make, I never want to do it again. I'm never going to do it again. I'm going to turn. I was always turning this thing around. I'm going to turn this thing around. And I made those promises with everything that was in me, but I could not keep them. And if that sounds like you, what I want you to know is you are not bad. You are not wrong. You are up against an illness over which you could possibly not have any power. And what we need to do is build a relationship with power, because we don't got it. So you are not bad. You are not wrong. You are not like broken. We got an illness, and we've got a solution. We got a way out. So, and it says, and besides, we are sure that our way of living. Now, if you're writing in your book, you can make a little note, way of living. I am going to emphasize, re-emphasize, this is a way of life. This is not a set it and forget it program. You guys know I can't have crockpot sobriety. I can't set it and forget it. I got to have stir-fry sobriety, where I'm in there and working it every single day. So this is a way of life. And I emphasize this because, you know, sometimes when you work with people and they're like, okay, when am I done? We're not done. This is how we live our life. And it says, and besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all. And we see that that line has become more and more true because we see that fellowships for a variety of human problems have sprung up since this book was published in 1939. And it's also a reminder that, man, if I got a problem, and I want to be clear, it is more than okay to seek outside help. And sometimes outside help is like, it's vitally important. But if I got a problem, I can always take it to these 12 steps. This way of life has its advantages for all. So it says, it is important that we remain anonymous. So it's explaining why it says Alcoholics Anonymous, and it doesn't say mostly written by Bill Wilson, who was dictating to Ruth Hawk, and he let Hank have a chapter. You know, that's not in the, you know, the title. Like, why is it published anonymously? So we're explaining it's important that we remain anonymous because we are too few at present to handle the overwhelming number of personal appeals which may result from this publication. So Bill was afraid this book would go out and everybody would be writing him, you know, Clinton Street, like, hey, you know, like 182, 132, I can't remember, but it's in my book. We'll get there later on, like his address, and asking for help and finding him. And he'd be so overwhelmed and wouldn't be able to live his life. It says, being mostly business or professional folk, we could not well carry out our occupations in such an event. He's like, I need some income, you know, I kind of got to do a bit of a 9 to 5. And it says, we would like it understood that our alcoholic work is an avocation. A vocation is the work that I do that is my paid employment. I don't got paid employment. All my life is an avocation. I advocate all the way. That's not how you conjugate that word. That's not, don't use that in a sentence like that. But what that means, an avocation is like a passion project. An avocation is work that we do for free. Listen, it is 1939. The United States is just about to come out of the Great Depression. It has been economically not great. And you're telling me a bunch of sober, selfish, self-centered alcoholics are going to help other alcoholics for free? For free? They're not charging? This is radical. And if you're writing in your book, you can make a little note that that is pointing to what will later become our 8th tradition, tradition 8. The 12-step work is never to be paid for, that this is work that we do for fun, because it is, and for free. And by the way, if you're just on the cusp of sponsoring, you're like, I don't know if it'll be fun. You got to dive in. It'll be fun. I promise you. It's great. And it says, when writing or speaking publicly, so we're talking about when we speak at a public level about alcoholism, we urge each of our fellowship to omit his personal name, designating himself instead as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. So sometimes people say, oh, I identify as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous because that's what it says to do in the big book. I just want to point out that this is at the public level. So if there's a news interview or a radio interview, sir, or a newspaper, or that sort of thing, that the alcoholic's name or the Alcoholics Anonymous member or whatever fellowship you're a part of, that their name is omitted, first and last name omitted, and instead the person is a member of Alcoholics Anonymous was quoted as saying. That's the description that we're giving. And what we see, and it goes on to say very earnestly, like sincerely, like please, we ask the press to observe this request, for otherwise we shall be greatly handicapped. Like we're going to be held back by publicity because we are not people who should get publicity. And those two paragraphs are pointing to what would then become tradition 11. And so if you make a little note if you want, I just get jazzercise these traditions. So we are not an organization in the conventional sense of the word. You can make a little note, tradition 9. And what does it mean? What does that mean? That, we all do that thing. The meeting starts a little late. I'm going to make sure we don't run over, do my best, knock on wood. Going to do my best to end on time. But if I don't, you guys will be like, ha ha, we have not be organized. That's not what that means. Ideally, I end on time, start on time, ideally. Ooh, I really shouldn't have set it up like this. I'm like, pressure's on. What that means is that each 12-step fellowship does not organize itself like a traditional structure where there's a boss, a CEO, a person who runs things. Then there's a CFO and managers and middle managers. You know what I mean? In fact, it's the reverse pyramid. And what we talk about is, how I like to talk about it, is the idea that the most powerful position that I could ever have in any group is simply member. And if I'm a member, every person who is in service is simply trying to serve me. But I look at it as once I get involved in service, it's like being a server at a restaurant, and I serve more tables. So as I have a service position in my home group, I serve my home group. If I have a service position at district, I serve my home group and I serve the district. And so I'm not climbing this ladder of success. I'm serving more and more people. That's what that means. It says there are no fees or dues whatsoever. Like if you have a gym membership, good for you. I do not. Squishy. But if you have a gym membership, you have dues, you have fees. We have no dues or fees. Our expenses are paid by our voluntary contributions, by our members. Listen, you're telling me 1939 drunks paying their own way. Radical idea. Like wild, we don't do that. Yeah. And so it says, so no dues, no fees whatsoever. The only requirement for membership is an honest. Oh, sorry, that is tradition 7 that we were just read. Sorry, I got excited about the gym. That hasn't happened in a long time. I'm just kidding. If you like going to the gym, genuinely, that's amazing. I'm happy for you. So that's tradition 7. And when it says the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking, that is tradition 3. And you'll notice it's a little bit different than our current tradition 3. They took out the honest because they know us. Because we are going to hyperanalyze. Oh, I don't know if my motives are honest. I don't know. You know what I mean? So we took that out to just make the bar as low as possible. Like, do you have a problem with whatever the focus is of that specific fellowship? And do you have a desire to be there? That's it. So we are not allied with any particular faith, sect, or denomination. That's tradition 6. So not allied with any other outside organization, any religion, anything like that. And when it says, nor do we oppose anyone, that is tradition 10. We're not in opposition. We don't engage in public controversies. Now this, we simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted. Our desire is to be helpful to those who suffer. And that idea of helpful, not fix, manage, save, cure, you know what I mean? Helpful. That is a beautiful theme that we will see in the chapters that are dedicated to helping others, to be helpful. And that is the 5th tradition. That is our primary purpose. And it says, we shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book, particularly from those who have commenced, that means to begin, work with other alcoholics. Man, we haven't even hit the doctor's opinion, and it's telling me I gotta work with others. It's telling me I gotta sponsor, taking others through the 12 steps. That's what we're talking about. And it says we should like to be helpful in such cases. So our goal is to be helpful. Inquiry by scientific, medical, and religious societies will be welcome. And in those early days, that was our public information, how we engaged with the public and found new drunks to work with. And then it says Alcoholics Anonymous. And because we're technically right at the hour and we finished that forward, that's a great place to leave it. So I'll stop the recording and we can wrap it up with a prayer.